Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to another movie review, and today we're going to be taking a look at Godzilla Minus One. 9 months later, this movie is finally out on Blu-ray. Well, I know it dropped on Netflix back in June of this year, but I still wanted to wait because one, I still wanted my thoughts to sink in a little more before I knew what I had to say, just like with all of my other movie slash show reviews or whatever, but also, I kind of wanted the hype surrounding this movie to die down a little bit, which, what do I mean by that? Well, stick around and I'll talk about it. So, yeah. Anyway, I just want to give a quick spoiler warning. This video will contain spoilers for Godzilla Minus One, so if you have not seen the movie yet, then please click off, go watch it, and come back. But if you have seen the movie, then stick around. Or if you haven't seen Godzilla Minus One yet and you still just want to stick around, which, I mean, thank you, but either way, do what you got to do. So, yeah, there's your spoiler warning. I don't really know what else to say, so let's just get right into this. So, Godzilla Minus One is the first Toho produced Godzilla movie since Shin Godzilla, which that movie turns 10 years old in 2 years. I'm getting old, but I digress. So Toho had to deal with Legendary that they couldn't make any Godzilla movies to leave room for the MonsterVerse. That's why we got, mostly MonsterVerse Godzilla movies. So Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla X Kong, etc. And when this movie was announced, actually, back in 2022, I remember towards the first half of that year, it was announced that Toho was going to be making a new kaiju movie, which I knew it was going to be Godzilla, right? Like Godzilla, as far as the Toho stuff goes, Godzilla's been pretty dormant since Shin Godzilla. So, yeah, I definitely didn't see them making a new War of the Gargantuas movie or a solo Rodan movie before bringing Godzilla back after, King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus Kong, etc. So, yeah, and sure enough, November 3rd, 2022, they announced that it was going to be a Godzilla movie, and I wasn't surprised, but I was still very happy because it has been a while since we've had a Toho produced Godzilla movie. I think, the Toho Godzilla movies are my favorite. I don't hate the MonsterVerse films. I think they're fun, but I don't know. I like the Toho movies more, but I digress. And just in time for Godzilla's 70th anniversary, 69th anniversary, I guess. It's better to be too early than to be too late, but sure. Uh, 70th anniversary, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, just in time for Godzilla's big birthday. So, yeah, now that the movie's out, what did I think? Well, let's talk about that. Starting with the characters. Now, we see a multitude of characters in this movie, such as Dr. Kenji, who is a scientist who develops weapons for the war, or Noriko, who is the unexpected love interest of the main character, but, well, the main character, Koichi Shikishima, I think he's genuinely great. And solely because of his acting, because his acting in this movie is unreal. So, for context, Koichi, he is a kamikaze pilot who evades his role because, he's scared to die. He's scared of the war. And throughout the movie, he is constantly being haunted by guilt and constantly being, haunted by, just constant just misery and just, being haunted of just evading war and doing, what he was supposed to. And his acting is absolutely phenomenal. Acting aside, he does go through a very nice character arc where he grows to, not just forgive himself, but he also learns to stop fighting this eternal war that is constantly brought up in this movie. And again, just the acting, I can't stress that enough. The actor who plays him did such a good job. There are moments where this character is both in physical pain and emotional pain. Not only do you see it, not only do you hear it, but you feel it. I I just can't stress this enough. His acting is absolutely phenomenal, and he is the absolute highlight of this movie. And again, I like the other characters too, but Koichi just stands out very much for me. So, yeah. The characters in this movie, overall, I do like them. Like I said, I do like Noriko. I do like Dr. Kenji. and even the head mechanic on Odo Island towards the beginning of the movie and like closer to the end, I think he is a great character as well. But my favorite character, Koichi, I think he does he is a great main character. So yeah, overall, the characters in this movie are great. Now we'll talk about the soundtrack, and the soundtrack to this movie is absolutely phenomenal. Of course, this being a Toho produced Godzilla movie, of course, we're going to hear the iconic Akira Ifukube tracks. They have been updated for this movie, and these updated versions sound phenomenal. Like, they're as good as they could get, which is pretty damn good. So yeah, the original Akira Fukube stuff that sounds great, but the original music made specifically for this movie also sounds really good. Like the soundtrack is very quiet, it's very eerie, it's very like foreboding, but it's really good. Like it fits the tone beautifully. Like the top three tracks that come to mind are Confusion, Unscathed, and Resolution. Those tracks are just absolutely phenomenal, especially Confusion. Confusion, it's so like unsettling, it's so eerie, it's so good. The soundtrack of this movie is absolutely fantastic. The writing in this movie is also incredible. It takes itself very seriously. It feels very similar in tone to the original 1954 film. There is barely any humor, if any at all, and overall the writing here, like it's not like over the top, it doesn't feel forced in any way. Like it feels natural while also being incredibly serious. And it just does such a phenomenal job at just capturing the likeness of the original 1954 film. It's very good. So again, the writing here is great. The cinematography, spectacular. Godzilla has a great sense of scale in this movie. Godzilla is genuinely scary in this movie. There are some shots that are done really nicely that we'll talk about more later, but the cinematography here is absolutely fantastic. The special effects, I will say, the CGI in this movie could have been a little better. Specifically, the first scene in the movie on Odo Island. I think the CGI used on Godzilla in that opening scene, I feel like I don't know, it doesn't look as great as it could be. Like Godzilla like later on in the movie, I think looks very good. I think he looks very detailed and very like Godzilla looks good like when he's Godzilla, but like before the Hiroshima bombing like on Odo Island, the CG, I don't know what it is, but some of the movements that Godzilla does there just feels a little off to me. But besides that, the special effects I think do look very nice, and especially for a budget of like essentially $12 million, this movie has a very low budget, but some of the CGI shots in this movie looks phenomenal. So, yeah, special effects not perfect, I will admit, but overall very good. So the special effects are still very good. The sound design, I really like the use of the original 1954 Godzilla's roar here, right? It's modified depending on like the context of the scene. Like when Godzilla gets hurt or gets hit by like missiles or whatever, then it sounds a little more like raspy and like he's in pain. But like his roaring, like when he's roaring at like I don't know, when he's roaring at like a building or something, like it's like edited to make him, seem more angry. So, yeah, the sound design in this movie is also just very good. So, yeah. Now, I want to talk about my overall negatives with the movie. Now, I'll keep this short because I don't really have a lot of negatives. In fact, it's just two things I want to talk about, but still, I do have some things that I would have done differently. So, let's get into those. First of all, I think that it would have been a lot nicer if we sort of got to understand like the mythos of Godzilla in this movie. Like towards the beginning of the movie, Godzilla is seen as a more traditional like theropod type dinosaur before it gets mutated by the bombing of Hiroshima. And I think it's a really cool callback to Godzilla versus King Ghidorah with the Godzillasaurus, but there's no like backstory there. Godzilla's just kind of there on Odo Island. And while he's attacking the base there, the characters just kind of talk to each other and are just kind of like, oh, the locals told me about Godzilla. I thought he was just a myth, but I guess not. Which, to me, feels pretty lazy. I wish they went into more detail with, like, the history of Godzilla in this movie, or, like, how he got there, or, what he's doing there, or whatever. I know in like the junior novelization or whatever, I know there was like some sort of novel tie-in with Godzilla Minus One, said that he had a symbiotic relationship with the natives of the island who, fed him fish, like, or not fed him fish, but like left fish out for him to eat or something like that. I don't know the whole story, but I wish we just got a little more something, like anything, like more of that, but also like maybe something else. I don't know. I just wish they could have, explained Godzilla's history on Odo Island a little better. Instead, it just feels really lazy and really copped out, in my humble opinion. So, yeah, that's one thing I would have done differently. The other thing that I'm not too crazy about in this movie is Godzilla's presence. Now, I'm not talking about screen time, I mean just like presence, because after the atomic breath scene in Ginza, he doesn't really have a lot of presence. It's mostly he's just kind of swimming around the ocean somewhere. Like Shin Godzilla has the same problem, but at least in Shin Godzilla, after the first atomic breath scene, like it's very clear that Godzilla's like resting and like recharging. So there's a reason why, the movie is really quiet right now, because currently Godzilla's not a threat. But here, Godzilla, he destroys Ginza and he just kind of goes back to the ocean for a little bit without any rhyme or reason. And come to think of it, he doesn't really come on, like, he just kind of shows up in Ginza for no reason at all. There's no, like, no trying to feed on radiation or anything like that, or just trying to. I don't. There's no reason, because in the Heisei movies, like at least in Godzilla 1984, the reason why Godzilla came to land was because he was feeding off of radiation. Here in Godzilla Minus One, he just kind of shows up, and again, like I wish they sort of gave Godzilla a reason to be there, as well as just give him a little more presence, like after the first atomic breath scene. Like the finale of the movie with like all the boats and all that. That's great. I really like that. But again, Godzilla's just kind of swimming around the rest of the movie, and I feel like his presence could have been a little stronger. But yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much it for my overall negatives with this movie. Now, we'll talk about the positives. And the presence that Godzilla does have in this movie is really good. Godzilla is genuinely scary in this movie. Like, Godzilla hasn't been scary since the original 1954 film. Shin Godzilla came close. Shin Godzilla had very nice, like, horror elements, but Godzilla himself didn't really feel scary in that movie. Here, Godzilla feels genuinely terrifying. Specifically, there's like a scene where like Godzilla's chasing this like smaller boat, and like all the characters are like trying to shoot at him and trying to like blow him up with the whatever you call them, those like floating like whatever you call those. I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, like they're trying to shoot at those and like blow Godzilla up, and it is done really well. It feels like something straight out of Jaws, which is my third favorite movie of all time. So yeah, Godzilla in this movie, like even though he doesn't have a lot of presence towards the end, the presence that he does have is very good. And Godzilla again just feels genuinely scary, and I absolutely love that. Again, I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but the acting in this movie, again, is just phenomenal. The actor who played Koichi did, again, just such a good job. Like, he stood out the most to me because his acting, like, not only did you see him in pain and you heard him in pain, you felt him. You felt like everything that's going through his mind right now, and it is done so beautifully. The acting here is just great. This movie, another thing that I really like, this movie is just very, like, in tone, just very close to the original 1954 film, as far as just being, like, just very depressing and very serious and very scary. Because that's kind of Godzilla's origins. Like, Godzilla comes from, unfortunately, a very scary and very serious place, which was the bombing of Hiroshima. And this movie, I think, captures that beautifully. Trying to rebuild after the bombing and just. It's so good. Like it just feels very close to the original 1954 film, and it is just done just miraculously. And the other thing I really like, is like the message of the ending, the very anti-war message where, you know, throughout the movie, Koichi, he's very like traumatized by abandoning his post in the his role in war, and he's constantly haunted by guilt. he feels, responsible for the deaths of so many people from the Godzilla attack on Odo Island. And yeah, like the tone of like, and he also just comes to the conclusion, like the moral is just kind of like, war is something that obviously is not good, and not going to war is something to be proud of, you know? And I mean, in the case of this movie, it's definitely war, but I feel like that could be applied to like other, like, very traumatic things that someone might go through, and it just hits so hard. It is just done absolutely beautifully here. So, yeah, the anti war message, and even like the name of the movie, Godzilla Minus One, because at this point, like, immediately after the bombing of Hiroshima, Japan had nothing. Pretty much nothing. And then you throw Godzilla on top of that, and now they have less than nothing because Godzilla's here, and Godzilla's destroying everything. So, yeah, like the anti-war messages, like the ending, and like even the title of the movie is like just perfection, genuine perfection. It is just done so well. I absolutely love it. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for my overall positives with the movie. This isn't really a negative or a positive. I just want to talk about the ending for a little bit because the ending is kind of a double edged sword for me. So, I know I gave a spoiler warning towards the beginning of this video, but spoiler alert. Um, there like towards the middle of the movie, during the Ginza, like when Godzilla's attacking Ginza. Of course, that's that's like the first atomic breath scene, like the first big one. Godzilla uses his atomic breath like during like the beginning where he's chasing the boats. But like this is the first like, real time we see Godzilla use his atomic breath. And in this scene, it is implied that Noriko died from the impact of, Godzilla's, atomic breath. And the ending of the movie is Koichi finding out that Noriko is actually okay. And yeah, it's just a happy ending, which is a double-edged sword for me because on the one hand, it would have made sense. It would have made more sense if she died, but at the same time, like it also would have been more impactful, because like Koichi, he would have learned to like have grown and just accept everything that is like come up to this point. So I think it would have been more impactful if she stayed dead. But on the other hand, the reunion between Koichi and Noriko is genuinely so sweet, and I know I mentioned this before, but the acting from both of these characters are just phenomenal. Like the acting in this movie overall are great. And I'm not like discrediting all the other actors, but like the acting in the final scene where they're like reuniting after the atomic breath scene, I think is done really nicely. So the ending for me is kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it would have made more sense if she died, but again, like the reunion between Noriko and Koichi is like when you're watching the movie, you're not even thinking about that. You're just genuinely happy to see these two like reunite like this. It's it's complicated, but I digress. Another thing I want to talk about this movie that's very like hits me emotionally is the huge success that this movie found. Now, growing up, I loved Godzilla for a pretty good chunk of my life. But growing up in school, nobody really knew what Godzilla was. I was kind of the only one who knew what Godzilla was. I try to talk about it with, some of my friends, and they just kind of look at me like, what are you talking about? There were some people in my school who knew what Godzilla was and kind of liked Godzilla, but I mean, that's a whole other can of worms. But yeah, growing up, like I was that weird Godzilla kid who nobody knew like what I was talking about. And then cut to 2023 or March of 2024, Godzilla Minus One comes out, which, first of all, this movie was supposed to be in theaters for just a week. Like, not even a week. I think just like 5 days. Or, no, a week. A week. It was only going to be in theaters for a week. But the movie was doing so well, they extended it to 2 whole months. This movie made $100 million worldwide, and it got a black and white release, the minus color version. This movie won an Oscar. Okay, Godzilla. There has never been a Godzilla movie to win an Oscar up until this point, which is so cool. Like, I feel like it should have won more awards, if I'm being honest. Like, but one Oscar for a Godzilla movie, that is insane to me. And even like I've had like I went to go see Godzilla Minus One with one of my best friends, and even he really enjoyed it. And I get texts from all these people saying like, "Oh, dude, I saw Godzilla Minus One. That movie was really good." Or even like my dad, he texted me one morning and said like, "Dude, like I saw Godzilla Minus One won an Oscar. I just wanted to say congratulations." And it was genuinely like it was genuinely sweet, like growing up nobody knew what Godzilla was, but now Godzilla is he's just in like such a really good place right now. Like just just this movie being successful just really hits me emotionally. So that is one thing that I am really happy about with this movie. Just the success of this movie and like how just extraordinarily well it did when it came out here in the States and worldwide too. But yeah, with that said, all this success, of course, there are going to be some negatives. Unfortunately, there are a lot of film snobs on YouTube going around saying that, you know, there are only three good Godzilla movies, which are the original 1954 film, Shin Godzilla, and Godzilla Minus One. And the rest of the franchise is just, trash. Just, you can disregard that. You only need these three movies, which I think feels very disrespectful to the franchise. Like, I will admit, spoiler, these are, I think, the three best Godzilla movies, but to say the rest is irrelevant is very just unfair. I'm not a big fan of that sentiment because there are so many other Godzilla movies besides, like, those three that genuinely have, like, a very impactful message or story. GMK has a very powerful, like, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla has, and even just having like just really good storytelling. It doesn't necessarily have to have like a moral or anything like that. And even even All Monsters Attack, yes, the one with Gabara, even that movie has very strong commentary about the low income living conditions in Japan at the time. So again, the original 1954 film, Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One, I will admit those are my three favorite Godzilla movies, but most of the other Godzilla movies in the franchise also have a lot of merit, But at the end of the day, I can't get mad at these people for saying that there are only three good Godzilla movies because that is their opinion, Art is subjective, and if they don't like the other Godzilla movies, then that's totally fine. This actually segues into my other point as far as the negatives with how much is of a success that this movie has become, which is and not just with this movie, but with a lot of movies in general that come out nowadays. Not even movies, like games or shows or whatever, just in general, it's just a hot mess. The toxic positivity is some of the most exhausting thing to deal with, right? I have not been attacked by any of these people. I try to keep my mouth shut on social media when it comes to that. I don't get involved, but even just reading some of this is just genuinely exhausting. Even the people who say that, these are the only three good Godzilla movies, people get mad at them and people go out of their way to attack them. People who say they don't like Godzilla Minus One, they attack them and are very rude. And even the people who say they like Godzilla Minus One, but they might like a certain movie more than Godzilla Minus One, they also got kind of attacked. And it was just very exhausting to deal with. Granted, this was not as bad as other cases, like with the second Sonic movie. I think it was just an absolute train wreck with that movie as far as like toxic positivity goes. But the toxic positivity surrounding Godzilla Minus One was just insufferable when this movie first came out. It's like, it's a movie. These are movies, okay? Like, they mean a lot to me. They mean a lot to other people. I get that, but they are movies. They are products. They don't have feelings. Acting like this is not okay, right? If you're above the age of like 13, 14, like grow up. I'm sorry, just genuinely grow up, okay? People are allowed to like things, but people are allowed to dislike things. There is no reason people should be getting ganged up for having these sort of opinions. It is very exhausting, but I digress. In conclusion, Godzilla Minus One is an excellent movie that captures the likeness of the original 1954 film beautifully. It is now my third favorite Godzilla movie of all time. My favorite Godzilla movie of all time will always be the original 1954 film, and not only my favorite Godzilla movie, but my second favorite movie of all time. I love the original 1954 film. And I like Shin Godzilla a little more than Minus One because the way it presents itself, like as a movie, is so unique compared to the rest of the movies in this franchise that it's genuinely like really well done. That and I was in high school when Shin Godzilla came out, and seeing that in theaters was, very impactful for me. One of the most impactful like movie going experience I've ever had growing up. So there is a little bit of sentimental value with Shin Godzilla, but again, like on a more artistic standpoint, the way it presents itself, as a movie, how it presents the characters, how it presents Godzilla himself, I think is done so uniquely. It works really nicely. But Minus One is still a very good movie. So out of a 10, I'd give Godzilla Minus One a 9. It is a very good movie. And again, if you're one of the people who didn't care about spoilers but still, sat through this video, if you haven't seen Godzilla Minus One, please do yourselves a favor and watch it. It is a phenomenal movie. So, yeah. Anyway, that is it for today. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. Zack out.